r/nosleep. Hosted by you/BrittonRT. There was always something off about my uncle. Now I believe in God. Part 1. As these things often go, holy shit, where to begin? Well, I guess I'll start with the property. It was the first time I had been there, an old country farmhouse in Vermont. It was a rather modest wooden 2-story thing from the 1800s and the place where my mother and her siblings had grown up. Mom had never let me visit before, even though my cousins had stayed with us plenty of times. I finally understand why, and now, you will too. She didn't stick around after dropping me off, just made some uncomfortable pleasantries with Uncle Tom while I went off to locate Jamie and Chris. She shouted goodbye to me through the rolled down car window and I glanced back to wave her off, but caught her giving the house one last nervous glance before she drove away. Her strange warning, repeated several times throughout the drive, hung a bit in the back of my mind. Promise me you won't go in the house after dark. Tom's full of shit. I'd mostly written it off. My mom is a weirdo into weird things. Very spiritual person. She had only allowed me to come at all after a long shouting match over the phone with my uncle, which resulted in them agreeing we'd be camping on the property. Which was fine by me, the place was amazing. I quickly caught up with my cousins setting up camp by the pond under the willow tree. The whole space was picturesque, nestled in the gentle woods with a small red barn like some print of an oil painting you'd find in the hallway of an aging couple's home. Jamie is great. She was one of my best friends growing up, and though we didn't see each other as often ever since Gramps died and they moved into the old house, we still kept in touch quite frequently. So like my mom, we didn't waste much time on pleasantries either. So Chris isn't going to help? I asked, the question probably a foregone conclusion in disguise. I had already started chipping in and was struggling to figure out how to get one of the poles through the many loops of the tent correctly. She just rolled her eyes, and we kept going as Chris rode his bike haphazardly around the pond and scattered trees. It didn't take long to finish getting set up, and he decided to join us just in time to miss having to do anything useful. Hey bud, how's life in the country treating ya? He kicked his little bike to the grass as he dismounted. It's alright, I guess. Must have been a hard move for your age. I commented idly. He shrugged and started poking at the pond water with a stick. I turned my attention back to Jamie. I would have loved living here at his age. I started unpacking my sleeping bag as I made the casual admission. I'd always loved the outdoors, running, playing, and generally goofing off outside of the range of my mom's helicopter-like supervision. Leaning against the old willow tree, she picked at her nails. It has its perks, but you know how he is. Chris was nearly 5 years our junior and he had always been a nose to his phone type, but Jamie and I on the other hand were nearly of one mind. I was about to suggest she show me around the place when her dad finally showed up. Hey Kyle, long time no see. Tom was a bit of a jovial guy with a pun-fueled sense of dad humor. He wasn't bad company when they visited or during family holidays, even if I did cringe at most of his jokes. I had always felt there was something off about him though, I just could never put my finger on it. Where's Clara? I asked, looking for something to say. She's cooking up dinner for us, we'll be ready in a few hours. He looked around at the serene landscape about us. So, is it everything you expected? I really hadn't known what to expect. Mom never talked about the place. I hadn't really thought that odd at the time, but I know better in retrospect. We chatted briefly before he took his leave, freeing Jamie and I to tour the grounds together. She took me to the old barn first. Despite the bright summer day, it was dark inside, but as we crept in and my eyes adjusted, I made out an old broken down tractor in the corner and a large pile of boxes in another. The place was otherwise empty. After grasping about along the wall, Jamie found a light switch and the place sprung to life. I don't know if you remember, but Grandpa used to build those big machines here. She explained, apparently noticing that I was eyeing the boxes upon boxes of what looked like old mechanical bits. I did recall. The crazy hydraulic computers, how could I forget? The man had been eccentric, and his hobby had matched his character. I remember him proudly showing off one of his creations when I was 6 or 7, a ludicrous contraption of valves and pipes which was technically a calculator, albeit the size of a small car. He had hauled the whole thing to Thanksgiving at my mom's on a towed flatbed with a tarp thrown over. Is it still around? I inquired. Nah, Dad sold all of them on eBay or something. That was too bad, I recall thinking. They were like something right out of a steampunk fantasy. I wondered why he would have gotten rid of such a unique heirloom. We didn't spend much time there and moved on. There was a rotting treehouse at the edge of the wood, but it didn't look safe to ascend and Jamie made no motion or indication she intended to, instead moving right past toward a previously invisible path. It led into the woods, and I eagerly followed her every step. How far does it go? The forest looked older and more primal from the inside, the green canopy replaced by the many shades of brown which define a New England forest. I haven't found the end yet. She answered. I want to show you something cool. If Jamie thought it was cool, I knew I would, and she didn't disappoint. Wow, how old do you think it is? Dad says it is probably from the Pilgrim days. The old stone cottage had no roof, but the foundation and walls, weathered as they were, had seemingly stood the test of time. We climbed around inside it for a bit. It was quite small, and I couldn't help but imagine a whole family living in the cramped space deep in the wilderness of early America. I noticed a little pack mostly hidden behind a stone. Looked modern, and I crouched in to investigate. What's this? I pulled it out. Seemed to be a nylon bag full of some camping gear. Jamie snatched it away. Just what it looks like. I like to camp out here sometimes. Neat, I supposed. Seemed like a cool spot to get away from it all. Dinner time arrived before I knew it, and I found myself seated with the whole family in the dining room of the farmhouse saying grace. It looked like Clara had put her elbows into the meal, pulled pork barbecue, mashed potatoes, the whole works. It's fucking great. I smacked through a mouthful of grub. My mom would have given me hell for cursing, but I knew Tom and Clara were chill. Thanks, dear. Clara never spoke much, and when she did she was succinct and brief. A few more bites and I finally realized Chris wasn't at the table. Where's your brother? I prodded at Jamie. He likes to eat alone. Weird, I thought, not what I recalled, but whatever. People change. After we all took a few quiet moments to just enjoy eating, when the sound of footsteps began to emanate above. Odd, I thought, isn't Chris outside? Tom quickly and boisterously seized control of the conversation, as he so often did. So did Jamie give you a good look around? He seemed earnestly eager to know what I thought and waited with an almost awkward patience for my response. Yeah. It's a nice place, honestly dunno why Mom hates it so much. Almost as though he had been waiting for exactly this moment, he responded like he was reciting pre-rehearsed lines. She's just a scaredy cat. He grinned as he lamely integrated his sister's name into the turn of phrase, and I caught Jamie rolling her eyes out of the corner of my own. I didn't really know what to make of it nor how to respond, so I just kept shoveling in buttery potatoes. He hovered though, waiting for some kind of reply or continuation, and my eyes started to dart around the room from person to person once I noticed the deathly quiet which had taken the others. They'd become unusually interested in the food on their plates. Tom could have that effect on a crowd. He just smiled at me, looking like he was about to explode in anticipation. So I relented. All right. I'll bite. Why is she scared? I asked, mostly in a desperate attempt to end the sudden and strange mood. Because of the ghosts. That's right, she didn't tell you about that, did she? It was obvious he had been wanting to talk about this from the moment I had arrived. Ghosts? Dad, please don't do this. Jamie interjected as she speared a green bean. I wasn't about to look like a wimp in front of her, even if I had been scared, which I wasn't. Ha, ghosts. You really believe in that shit? Oh, you'll see, don't worry. Soon everyone will know the truth. What a strange conversation, I thought. So you're saying the house is haunted? I looked toward Jamie for some sort of indication that her father was insane, but she ignored my gaze and continued to stare with fake fascination at her plate. With nowhere else to go, I re-engaged the bizarre dialogue. All right then, Mom did say not to go into the house at night. She seemed pretty insistent. Want to sleep in the guest bedroom? He immediately offered. Dad, stop. We're camping, that's what you agreed. Jamie seemed visibly irritated as she raised her voice. I was about ready for this uncomfortable dining experience to end. He gave in, and after dinner we found ourselves reunited with Chris out by the pond. Tom helped us start a small campfire but was quickly shooed away by Jamie before he could get too comfortable and start talking again. We started chit-chatting about what we'd been up to the last 6 months or so since I'd last seen her, only occasionally interrupted by Chris's coughing and vomiting over by the pond. I could only see his silhouette in the fading light. He okay? I asked after a particularly violent episode. He's fine. Sounds like he's been drinking or something. She just gave me a smirk and left it at that. I trusted her, and sure enough he joined us around the fire shortly after. He even engaged in the small talk a bit more eagerly than I had expected. Honestly, he seemed more lively and energetic than he had earlier, and way more talkative. Soon the conversation turned to the supposed ghosts. So he's joking, right? About the house being haunted? Jamie paused a moment before answering. No, he's not. If she agreed with her dad, well, let's just say it suddenly made it far more believable to me. I had many follow-up questions to ask, but Chris chimed in before I could voice them. "It's almost dark, Bernie will be here soon," he said as he probed the fire with a stick. I was about to ask who Bernie was when, almost on cue, the pattering of small footsteps penetrated the sound of the slight evening breeze. They were soon followed by a little bark as a shadowed silhouette crossed the reflected light of the pond, making its way toward our camp. "I didn't know you all had gotten a dog." The little furry thing bounced happily into the illuminated space around the fire and Chris rubbed its head. "It's cute," I admitted. "Neighbor's dog. Lets him out at night," Jamie explained. "Who lets their dog out at night?" The evening went on and topics migrated after a few failed attempts to elicit additional details about these so-called ghosts, and before I knew it I was yawning under a nearly full moon. We decided to retire to our tents and call it an evening. And, of course, I woke up in the middle of the night needing to take a royal shit. Unzipping my tent and emerging into the darkness of the late hours, I couldn't help but notice how the mood of the entire place had transformed since I had gone to bed. There was no wind anymore, just an eerie and oppressive darkness under the now strangely ominous willow. The faint moonlight was fortunately bright enough to guide me toward the old house. My mother's warning barely entered my head as I made a frantic dash to the door in pursuit of the porcelain relief which dwelled within. Aside from a few creaks from the door, which had fortunately been left unlocked, I soundlessly found my way through those black, gaudily papered halls to the downstairs restroom. Fumbling for and flicking on the light, I sat in the small space with its flower-printed walls and shat my brains out. The mirror and sink had been awkwardly placed right across from the toilet, so I was gifted with my own goofy expression as my body expunged itself. I was nearly finished when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Normally I would have written it off immediately as being Tom or Clara, but the words of my mother and Jamie both lingered in my head as they gently thumped closer and closer. I was sure it couldn't be, but the footsteps were irregular, like someone was limping or walking with a strange interval. Not taking any chances, I locked the door using the old key left stuck in the ancient-looking keyhole before speaking under my breath, trying not to be too loud. "Tom? Is that you?" The sound of movement stopped right outside the bathroom door and lingered for a tense moment before moving on. If it had been Tom, why hadn't he responded? That was the thought which caused me to try again, just in case he hadn't heard me. "Tom? Clara?" Still without reply, the noises faded away entirely after another few minutes, and I quickly made my exodus from the bathroom and reacquainted myself with the now foreboding, pitch-black hallway. Every inch I tiptoed felt like it brought me closer to whomever had been right outside that door, but I needed to get back to the camp and there was only one way out. Fortunately, I had no unwelcome encounters and soon found myself under the moonlight once more. It wasn't until I was halfway to the tents that I looked back at the house and noticed something. My brain registered it almost subconsciously before my attention was seized and my eye snapped to it, bringing it from the periphery of my vision and into full focus. Once centered, it was undeniable. I nearly screamed. The figure standing in the window looked old. His hair was tattered, his face locked in a frown. But it was his eyes that I recall most clearly. They didn't match his expression. No, they were out of place. Quite literally, out of place. Bulging from their sockets like they sought escape from his face. Staring, wide as saucers, directly at me. But what bothered me even more was the figure standing behind him. It was so tall, a black shadow almost possible to miss, if it weren't for its own eyes. They weren't like the old man's. These were just two pricks of light against the black. It retreated after a moment, but the old man remained, fixated on me. And so I ran. Perhaps I did scream after all, I'm not sure. I likely did, as Jamie was already halfway out of her tent by the time I nearly plowed over her. Man. Window. I'm sure there was a sentence hidden in those two words as I blurted them, and fortunately she understood. In fact, she seemed unfazed even as she pushed me off of her, forcing me to release my iron clasp. "Yeah, does he look familiar?" I could see her eyeing the windows one by one as she said it, but I didn't dare look again myself. I stopped for a moment as her words sank in. "Familiar? Perhaps. Yes, definitely. Grandpa," I said it, but wasn't sure I believed it. He looked so. But he looked like. His eyes. Words were not coming easily, but I tried to sputter them out. I could still see them, protruding from his visage. Two perfect circles illuminated by the small amount of moonlight which penetrated the old warped glass they dwelt behind, locked on me. Instead of saying anything, Jamie simply embraced me again, whispered something in my ear, and then offered to get the fire going once more. I wouldn't say I accepted happily, but certainly eagerly, and did everything in my power to expedite the return of some flicker of light to the underside of the imposing willow tree. What she'd said in my ear was strange. "It's a trick." But the fire was quickly going again. And once it was, I began to calm. It took some time for me to clear my head and regain the nerve to finally glance back at the now suspect structure. It was just a black outline against the dark blue sky from my perspective by the fire. If the old man was still there, watching, there was no way to know. "There is something in there." Jamie finally broke the silence I had barely been cognizant of. I looked at her as she twirled her brown hair in her finger, a tick I knew meant she was uncomfortable as well. "And you can live there?" I asked incredulously. She nodded. "I often have too." I didn't understand at the time. The very idea of stepping back in that house seemed unthinkable. I imagined those eyes watching me as I slept, as I showered, as I ate and shit and tried to live a normal life. Those bulging, horrible eyes. The conversation from dinner began to return to me. Specifically, Tom. Uncle Tom and his almost comical excitement as he tried to steer the conversation onto the topic of, "Oh, you'll see, don't worry. Soon everyone will know the truth." "Jamie." I struggled to figure out which of the many questions running through my mind I wanted to ask first. "Why did your dad seem so calm about all of this? I mean, that's Grandpa, right? That's his dad." She looked away and took some time to finally reply. She hesitated. "Dad is." Time passed, and I waited for her to finish. Her statement's conclusion never arrived. "He's what?" Even though I couldn't see her face well, turned away as it was, I knew she was unhappy. I could feel it. But if I had any doubt, her words confirmed it. "I'm afraid of him. I don't know what to do." Whatever fears I had were suddenly assaulted by a wave of different emotions. I had few friends, and Jamie wasn't just a friend or family, she was both. I knew her to be braver than I, and if she was frightened of something, what did that mean? I had to know more. I decided to be direct. "I don't understand. Please tell me what is going on." But when she still hesitated, my words came out again as a plea. A plea, and an offer. "Please, Jamie. Maybe I can help." Fat chance, I knew, but it seemed like the right thing to say at the time. Two strange things happened just after I spoke the words. I took them each in simultaneously and they competed within my skull for primacy, seeking to dominate my attention. It was hard, perhaps impossible to focus fully on either as the true horror of both demanded all I had. From the darkness of the still pond, a shadow of a figure was emerging. How long had it been surfacing? I don't know, but that was the moment it caught my notice. It was walking casually toward the camp as though it barely noticed it was half submerged. But perhaps more disconcerting was the man I noticed standing just on the other side of the willow tree, hugging the dark. I'm not sure how I hadn't noticed him before. How long had he been there? How had both these things escaped my attention until that moment? And why was Jamie still looking away, unwilling to make eye contact? I could feel the dread on her. I could feel it radiating from her and into me. Or was it my own? One single thought shook me out of my split-second stupor, and that was the animal instinct telling me to run. Run as fast as possible. Run. 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 I don't know why I screamed it, it just came out of my mouth before I could give it much thought, and I had Jamie by the wrist, nearly tripping us both as I dragged her to her feet. We made for the tree line. It was hard to drag her along, and it took several minutes to realize it was because she was resisting. "Stop. Kyle, stop." She was shouting at me, but I had barely noticed. Her words had some power over me, even if just because of the care and respect I had for her, and I did stop. Long enough to get a few words out and finally put together what I had seen. "Chris. The fuck? Chris and your dad, what the fuck?" Jamie put her arm around my shoulder. "Calm down. It's okay." There was something comforting about the way she said the words. But still. I didn't see how it could be okay. "Did you see them? Did you?" A moment of silence, and all I could imagine was that creepy smile on Tom's face as he had peered around the side of the tree. Right at me. I knew they were there. She answered, finally. She seemed surprisingly unconcerned. My anxiety spiked as I stared with horrid anticipation back toward the campfire we had just left. But nobody was there. And thus, the choking darkness around us felt as though it were drowning me in possibilities. Terrible, terrible possibilities. As though at any moment that sick, horrific smile Tom had somehow found would emerge from the black, inches from my face. Or perhaps Chris's waterlogged form would shamble into view. Or maybe both. Fuck it, I dragged her off into the woods anyways. She didn't resist this time, Nor did she speak again. We ran along the narrow, overgrown path as best as we could manage in the dark. Eventually, I needed to take a break, and stop to catch my breath. We were near the old ruined cottage. It seemed I could barely make out its shape between the trees. We should get out of here. They're coming, Jamie whispered. Something felt wrong, like we were being watched, and I quickly started to agree. Yeah. Why had I run into the woods, of all places? I started to turn. Let's go. Boo. I won't deny I nearly shat again as Jamie's dad gave me a comical grin, theatrically waving his fingers in my direction. I yelped. Holy fucking shit, Tom. I had to catch my breath for a second. What the fuck? Chris was next to him laughing. What is a dog? And even Jamie had seemingly joined in. Got you good. So good. Tom almost seemed proud as he gloated. The fuck is this? I panted. Just a bit of a prank, bud. That plastered grin bugged me. With all the stories I'm sure your mom has fed you over the years, figured it would be the perfect opportunity. I wasn't finding it particularly funny. Something was still wrong. I'm gonna go back and get John, Tom added. Hang tight. He disappeared down the path and into the dark. John? That was Grandpa's name. Wait. Your dad? I saw him. In the window. Yeah, that was the icing on the cake, Tom yelled back. No way you'd have expected that. I was confused, and huddled close to Jamie, who was snickering as well, much to my displeasure. She stopped the moment the man was out of sight, and her expression grew solemn. Please tell me what the hell this is, I whispered. Just a joke, seriously. Grandpa is actually just fine. He faked his death to get rid of a debt. She hesitated. That's why he asked us to take the house over. Jamie put a finger over her lips and tried to wink reassuringly. Keep that a secret. She looked unhappy, though. You've got to be fucking shitting me. Does my mom know? Tom was already beginning to head down the trail, but Chris lingered with us. No. Dad doesn't trust her not to spill the beans. Jamie, I swear to God I thought I was going to die. That wasn't funny. Sure, Tom was a bit of a joker, but I'd never seen him attempt anything so sophisticated. I dunno, it was kind of funny. Chris chimed in. The forest was beginning to bother me. I still couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched by someone. We should head back. I was pretty pissed, but also tired. And fuck you guys. We made our way toward the camp and bumped into Tom and John on the way. Gramps was just as I remembered him as he slapped me on the shoulder. Good to see you, young man. Seemed to be alive and material, from what I could tell. Hi Grandpa. I wasn't sure how I was supposed to respond to the sudden discovery that he was, in fact, still alive. You'll keep this little secret between us, I trust? I shrugged. Yeah, I guess. It's kind of fucked up though, you know? Kind of illegal. And morally questionable. His wide eyes were still stuck in my head. How'd you do the eye thing? He grinned, and I could definitely see a bit of Tom in it. His eyes suddenly bulged halfway out his sockets, like that guy in the old TV commercials, before retracting again. He chuckled at my horrified expression. We neared the old farmhouse again, and the mood had turned to some quiet but leisurely conversation joking among the family. I mostly stayed quiet, still quite irritated, but my mood was beginning to improve. So I'd been pranked, so what? Really not a big deal. I was beginning to find some humor in it as well. Tom and John took their leave and we settled back around the fire. A quick glance as the door clicked shut and I spotted those same two pale lights in the window. How'd you all do that one? LEDs? I pointed absently in their direction. Do what? The lights in the window behind where Grandpa was standing. What lights? I checked again, and sure enough they were plain as day. I looked at Jamie to make sure she was looking at the right window. Bottom leftmost one. The two dots. She hesitated, giving it only the faintest glance. There's nothing there, Kyle. Again I checked. No, there is. They began to drift back into the dark of the house beyond the window. Wait. I began to feel angry. You're fucking with me again. I don't know what you're talking about. We should get some sleep, I'm tired too. She seemed pretty intent on dodging this. But I wasn't going to have it. Oh fuck no, you all aren't pulling one over me again. Come on, let's go. I began to head toward the house, but she didn't seem to be following. Jamie? I can't. Come on. I grabbed her by the wrist and gently pulled her to her feet, bringing her stumbling along behind me as I made my march to dispel whatever hoax in waiting this was. When we got to the door, she pulled away. I can't go in there. What do you mean? Please don't make me. Something about her tone this time, I couldn't help but think she sounded genuinely fearful. It gave me pause. That concern wasn't enough to dissuade my growing annoyance. These jokes aren't funny anymore, Jamie. I'm going to check it out. Okay. She whimpered. I'll wait here. I entered the house cautiously, trying not to make too much noise. Last thing I needed was to wake Tom and get another startling boo thrown at me. The dreary place was just as I'd left it, quiet but for a few creaky floorboards and my own breathing. I tiptoed into the kitchen, quickly locating the window Grandpa had been standing at, tucked into the corner. Nothing there. Hand cupped over my brow, I pressed against the window and looked out. It was easy enough to see the campfire and the willow. Wouldn't have been hard for Gramps to spot me and ogle his creepy performance my way. Turning around, I took in the rest of the room. No obvious sign of anything else. I figured they'd probably put whatever contraption or Halloween display they'd used away before heading upstairs. I'd drill Tom about it tomorrow, he'd almost certainly be eager to brag about it. I only made it a couple steps toward the door when I saw it down the hall. 2 little white lights. I froze. They weren't still, but slowly bobbed and swayed. It was hard not to anthropomorphize them. They looked like they could be 2 beady eyes staring from just around the corner at the end of the hallway. And that same feeling I'd gotten from the woods was here. Like I was being watched. Caught between a desire to run and a desire to march over there and reveal the nature of this jest, I swallowed my heart back down my throat and did the latter. The lights retreated as I approached, slipping off into what I knew was the living room. It gave me pause again. Who was moving them? Tom? John? I tried not to be too loud. Clara? No response. Continuing to tiptoe, I discovered the corner the dots had been hovering around. Leaning in and peering into the living room, still nothing. I was starting to wonder if I simply had an overactive imagination, but I knew I'd seen something. Again, I resigned myself to asking Tom about it in the morning. I turned around to leave and nearly screamed. Hand cupped over my mouth, I stopped myself, whispering instead. Jesus fucking Christ. I thought you weren't coming in? It was hard to see her, but a muffled sob told me she was crying. Jamie? Are you okay? She clung to me suddenly, and then practically dragged me down the hall and out of the house, plowing out the door. Jamie, what's going on? I struggled to keep up. The little dog was jumping around, yapping as we passed it by. Not at us though, from what I could tell. If you can see it, you shouldn't be in there. I'm sorry I didn't stop you. She was obviously weeping as she spoke. Approaching the tents, the sound of a zipper revealed Chris, presumably clambering out to see what the fuss was all about. As soon as he saw Jamie's face, he frowned and retreated back inside, zipping himself in again. Weird. I don't want to stay here tonight. Let's go to the old ruin in the woods. It didn't sound like a suggestion, something told me she was going with or without me. Jamie? I just wanted her to talk to me. To explain what was going through her head. Jamie, tell me what's wrong. Just get your sleeping bag or whatever. I don't want to be here any longer than I have to. That same feeling of being watched. I looked over my shoulder, and 2 pale dots bobbed in that same window. If this is another prank, please just tell me now. This felt different though, and I didn't really care to stick around either. I quickly gathered a few things and soon we were off into the forest. It didn't take long to reach our new campsite. She set up a little battery lamp to light the old, roofless structure, and we laid out tarps, padding, and sleeping bags without tents. Laying there on our backs, you could see just the faintest few stars peeking through the canopy above. Jamie finally spoke. I'm sorry. I needed to be here, in private, to really talk. I was hoping I wouldn't have to, or I would have done it earlier. Talk about what? I sleep out here every night. She admitted. Every night I can. You can't imagine. She was crying again. You just can't. Lost for words, but overflowing with questions, I inched a bit closer to her. It's okay, you can talk to me. My mind was beginning to race with possibilities, the worst of which included things I didn't even want to think about. Was Tom or Grandpa hurting or abusing her? The chirping of crickets filled the cool night. It would have been peaceful, if not for all of this. After not elaborating for some time, I felt compelled to press on. Seriously, Jamie, you need to tell me what's happening. Are you okay? No, she cried. No, I'm not. My heart sank. What's wrong? You wouldn't understand. That annoyed me. I loved her to death, of course I'd understand. You can trust me, if you need help, I'm right here. Fuck, you've helped me so many times. She took my hand, and I tried to grip it reassuringly. You promise you'll believe me? Yeah, of course. If you promise this isn't another joke, I'll trust you. It certainly didn't feel like a joke. Okay. She sniffled. I started to feel something, a sense of dread. It was familiar, and I held my breath, listening for an expected noise. None manifested, but the feeling of being watched had arrived and persisted. The tightening squeeze on my hand from Jamie made me wonder if she felt it too. I had to ask. There's something here, isn't there? Yes. She whimpered back. I almost started hoping this was in fact a joke. The feeling was beginning to grow. Every instinct in me told me to either crawl into that sleeping bag and curl into a ball, or evacuate it and run like my life depended on it. I did neither. I was whimpering as well now. I think I want to go home. Me too, she sobbed. Usually it doesn't come out here. I could see it for a moment out of the corner of my eyes. Two pale lights, moving between the trees. It came and went in a blink. I sunk into my sleeping bag as far as I could while still leaving my wide eyes peeking out, and squeezed Jamie's hand even more tightly. She rolled over and hugged me. Oh God. Absolutely sobbing, she was a mess. I didn't have the slightest idea what to do as she buried her head into my shoulder. Help me. She begged. I'd been scared before, sure, but never in my life had I experienced anything close to the existential terror which fell over me as I saw the two dots slowly rise up over the stone wall above us. Two white dots, pointed down at my cousin, and some shadow lived behind them, a thing of impossible shape. I couldn't speak, but I tried. My mouth moved, but words wouldn't come out. Opening and closing, and finally something. Jamie? She turned her head and looked at me, then followed my gaze up. Her crying stopped, and we both held our breaths. But it descended behind the wall again, disappearing from sight. But I couldn't get the image out of my head. It was an unthinkable thing, made of strange angles. Almost maddening to look at. Jamie. As I gasped in a breath I'd been holding far too long, I started to panic. Jamie, what is that thing? She just rolled over and clutched me again. We have to get out of here, I exclaimed. I wasn't sure I wanted to move, but I started to scramble out of my sleeping bag. It won't help. It followed us because of you. Most people can't see it. Well, why the fuck can I see it? I don't know, she cried. I don't know what to do. My mind raced. I could see the thing's eyes again, passing between the trees through the door every few minutes. It was circling us. Does your dad know about this? Yes, she sobbed. Fuck, I just want to die. Tell me so I can help you. That's why he brought me here. She screamed. To replace your mother. I really didn't understand. My mother? She'd hated the house, of course, but what did that mean? Had she known about this? Pieces of some puzzle were beginning to become apparent to me, but I couldn't quite figure out their shape or how they might connect. What does this have to do with my mom? The eerie lights passed by the door once more. Grandpa passed it on from her to me. Jamie continued to grasp at me like her life depended on it. I don't know how to get rid of it. There were so many questions. Was it dangerous? Were we trapped here? Why did it look like it bent and curved in such strange ways, like it cared little for the laws of physics? But the most important question still hadn't been answered. Jamie. What is that thing? She wept for a while, still not answering. Jamie. Slowly pulling herself together, she finally told me something. I didn't know if it was true, but at least it was something. It's my guardian angel. She whimpered. Posted by you/BrittonRT. There's a hole in my head from which I speak. My eyes were drawn to his every sloppy smacking, teeth grinding relentlessly against the chewy sinews of charred flesh. Eat with your mouth closed. The order went out, only to be rejected by its recipient. Fuck off, Dad. Roland, watch your tongue. I'm not sure why Diane even bothered to say such things on my behalf. Perhaps it was just to fill the void with anything at all. Anything other than awkward silence. Not that such awkward sound made the evening any more tolerable. I added more words of my own to the void. Is that Mr. Parker? He's still lurking around the yard? Nah, he just hangs out in the back way now. A discomforting thought, though I tried not to show it. My eyes found the window in the living room. Why hadn't I closed the curtains? The skeleton of a woman who called herself my wife shoveled another portion of peas onto the family porcelain, the burnt steak untouched on her plate. I knew it was a protest. Sure, I may be a shite cook, but she could at least have the courtesy of pretending. That rubbish cost 10 quid. I was compelled to make a fuss. It's stale. Same thing we've had for months. Why can't you let me shop? Her words were as absent as always. Not a chance, it's a danger. Anyways, you'd like it if it were cooked proper. Roland rolled his eyes at the quibbling conversation, a categorical protest of his own. Right, I'm out, call me if you need me I guess. You two have fun. Sit your ass down. This is a family dinner. He nearly laughed out loud. Since when did you start caring about family anything? Since right now, besides you haven't said a goddamned word about Mr. Parker. I said he's in the back way. What exactly was I supposed to do with that information? He's behind the dumpster. We can go there right now. I couldn't think of anything I wanted to do less than confront him again. Too many days spent standing at the window, watching the man intrude. Not a chance. He scares the living shit out of me. My son made some cursory attempt to pass a few more moments by prodding at his food. I knew he was counting the seconds until his next attempt at evacuating the table. Might as well grant his wish. Fine then, get out. He didn't need to be told twice, and I found myself alone with Diane and what remained of my appetite. Which was, admittedly, as meager as she was these days. Phone still out. Had been for weeks, and she reminded me every evening. I know, I'm not a magician. Who would you call anyways? The climax of our discourse having been reached, I waited a quarter of an hour before dismissing myself in a similar fashion to my son. With great annoyance. Mr. Parker, in the back way? That sick fuck. Sure enough, I could see him there, his beady eyes staring right into the window. I pulled the curtains together, shielding myself from his gaze. Sleep came fitfully, and once it did I dreamed of him. My fist, shattering his teeth. Over and over again, the hammering of some divine justice made real in blood and tears. Why wouldn't he just die? I woke in a sweat on the couch, the darkness broken only by the inevitable ticking of the timepiece which adorned the western wall of the living room. A quick look confirmed Diane and Roland hadn't touched their food. Plates sat like some memorial in their respective spots at the table. I knew he was still out there. I had to look again. He was hard to make out in the fog of the pre-dawn, but he couldn't hide from me. Those hollow little eyes, finding me wherever I was. We were inseparable. I made my way up to Roland's room and knocked. He'd be pissed, waking him at this hour, but I didn't have much choice now, did I? He told me to fuck right off, as expected. Come on, just do me this one? Do it yourself. I don't owe you shit. I tried the door but it was locked. No surprise there either. Alright. Once downstairs again, I grabbed my jacket and cap, and a cane for good measure. The dew had come before the daylight, and the eerie dark of a misty morning permeated the rows of identical brick townhouses which line the drive. I slipped cautiously into the side road, stick like sword at the ready. He was waiting. Those eyes, tearing into my spirit. I could almost see the dirt on my hands. Fuck off, right? He was little more than a silhouette, but I knew he could see me. Why are you back here now? He said nothing, of course. Every step toward the dumpster was a dreadful moment, a descent into some nether which threatened to drown me. My cane was Excalibur, penetrating the fog of night, keeping the demon at bay as I slowly proceeded down the alley. Soon I could see him properly, and he smiled at me. All lips and gums, his mouth devoid of teeth. Hollow, like his eyes. Pitch black, blacker than the dark which filled this space. Blood still flowed down his chin, a crimson river making testament to what I had done to him over the years. Get out of here. It was a pointless utterance, I was certain. If only words held power, I could rid myself of this specter once and for all. But I knew not even a priest could save me. I'd of course tried everything. Back to the yard with you. It was selfish. But better there than here. At least there he could do no harm. I was half tempted to smack him over the head, cane him like I'd done before, but the dread which surrounded him was too great for me to pierce. I had barely realized how much I was still sweating until I tasted the salt on my lips. My cap, drenched as it was, came off. And the hole finally spoke back. Good day for a walk, don't you think? Shut up. It was still dark and damp. Good day indeed. What's the harm in a little look? Fuck right off. I could barely make out my own 2 feet in the empty alley. What was there to see? The man climbed onto the dumpster, and I considered knocking him about the knees. I could send him tumbling down and bash out what few teeth remained in that hole of a face. But as I always did, I just watched as he watched. Through the neighbor's window. The morning came with a headache, but that was to be expected. The bottles had compounded to the point that I could barely spot the kitchen sink through the forest of discarded plastic. Water's overrated anyways. Oatmeal cut through the illness somewhat, and a new day began. But a constant, watchful eye checked the alley regularly. The dumpster beckoned. The ghost remained. Back to the yard, the shrubs were in need of a trim. Always in need of a trim. "G'day, Alan." Mrs. Olson waved as she strolled by with her insufferable little dog, yapping every step. Some surrogate she'd chosen over me. I replied, feigning a smile. "Good day, Diane." An axe in that little mutt would do it some good. Every shearing of the hedge rang with a certainty, the click of blades colliding to cut the unwanted life from the brush. It would be so easy to snip off that tiny animal's head. Afternoon came so quickly, consequence of a late rise, and I soon found myself back indoors. The window, my usual retreat, revealed the brick-clad side street, the dumpster, and the man. His black, toothless smile attacked me, as it always did. Beady eyes fixed on my living room window. Perhaps a good time to go knock him about the knees. Send him back to the yard where he belongs. No, it was still far too early for such shenanigans. The place was filthy regardless, perhaps this was the long-awaited day I'd do a bit of laundry. Hang out the old sweat to dry, only to be replaced by the new. Put like that, it seemed pretty pointless. I found the liquor instead. Besides, the rot which consumed the place was just as much a consequence of the uneaten meal still languishing at the empty table. That smell served as an inspiration though, and I ascended to the second floor, my knuckles tapping on Roland's inevitably locked door. "You ever coming out?" "Leave me alone. I could use some help around the house, the place is a mess." "That's what family is for, yes?" "Fuck off. Asshole." The boy would say precious few words to me. Sometimes I was sure he didn't even know I existed. I knew I had a key somewhere, could I find it? Under the flower pot by the rear door. It was an unclear proposition, quickly abandoned. The kid deserves his privacy, right? Television filled the space of the bland and pointless afternoon. My man Boris was at it again, showing those loons in Parliament a thing or two, probably. Or maybe that was last week. It hardly mattered. But inevitably, I was drawn to the window. He was still there as dusk approached. Behind the dumpster. Watching. And the hole in my head, it spoke again. Good time for a bit of a stroll, yeah? A good time to knock him about the knees. Well, it was time for dinner anyways. Shit, forgot to go by the store. Always forget. But it's not like they ever touched their food anyways. Just the same routine, played out time and time again. The same boring conversations, lips read but not heard. Predictable as the clock on the wall. Darkness settled on the old house. A familiar shadow. Standing at the living room window, I watched the man climb on the dumpster once again. Peeking into a private place. Intruding on a life claimed long abandoned. It made me deeply uncomfortable, but what could I do? I considered grabbing my cane and sending him back to the yard, bashing a new hole into the man's toothless face, but it would just get filled with another set of dentures. This road had been well traveled. Instead, I sat with my family, ephemeral as they often seemed. Not much for conversation, but I could pretend. Diane was saying something, but it eluded me. My attention was fixated on my son. Every smacking of his lips, soundless as they were, spoke rivers. The smell of rot at the table floated away for a moment as I watched Roland consume his putrid meal. "Eat up, boy, that cost 10 quid. I barely even know you, Dad. Maybe if you didn't hide in your room so much, I'd see you more often. The dumpster doesn't reach the second floor. We've never even spoken. That can't be right. There's a hole in my head through which I speak. How could he have not heard it?" Roland clearly wanted to retreat to his room. "Fine, get out of here." He didn't have to be asked twice.